Hey everyone, this is going to be a little different than what I usually do. I know I've been gone for a while and there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of those reasons is I felt creatively lost with my channel. I want to make content that you guys enjoy, but I also want to make content that makes me excited and motivated to push forward. I know you guys love the story narrations, but I really hope you guys will be open-minded to me possibly exploring other types of content as well. As you can see, my name has been changed from Southern Cannibal to Canny. This is because I don't want to be tied down to just horror. I want to cover anything and everything on this channel. I want to evolve and grow, and in order to do that I need to explore other things. I'm still the same Southern guy who's gonna make videos. I'm just under a different name and going to do different things. This video though is for you guys, because I know you love the scary stuff, but moving forward I want to do different things. And I hope you guys will follow me wherever I go with this channel. But if not, I completely understand and I get it. And I appreciate you for being a subscriber and supporting me for as long as you have. Happy Halloween everyone. Now let's get to the video. And remember, stay hungry. The internet is a very interesting place. Anything you've ever wanted to know or explore is just a Google search and click away. But there's also a lot of darkness on the internet as well if you look deep enough. As most of you know, Reddit is what is called and known by most as the front page of the internet. As of February 2018, Reddit had 542 million monthly visitors, ranking as the number 3 most visited website in the United States, and number 6 in the world, according to Alexa Internet. Now, what the main point of this video is to take a dive into some of the most scariest and chilling stories found on Reddit. The main subreddit we're going to be exploring in this video today is Let's Not Meet. As most of you know, Let's Not Meet is a subreddit which allows users to post their own personal scary stories and experiences and share them with the world. I mean, this is pretty obvious since most of the stories, if not all that I've narrated, have come from Let's Not Meet. If you've ever had your own scary story or wanted to read one, this is the place to do it at. When I first got into listening to scary stories myself, there was one story in particular that's really got to me and shook me to my core. The story in question was posted on Let's Not Meet, titled The Smiling Man, submitted by Reddit user Blue Title. This is one of the most, if not the most popular story found on Let's Not Meet. The story details an encounter of an individual who, while on a late night walk around a deserted and quiet street, comes across a strange man who can be seen dancing along the street, all the while having a creepy and sinister smile on their face the whole time. He spent over 4 years going on late night walks to pass the time while being bored, and nothing strange or creepy ever really happened until one late Wednesday night. He was walking by a park late at night as he usually did, and as it was pretty late, no one else was around. He then turned onto a side street to loop back around to get to his apartment and begins to see a man doing a strange and creepy dance. The dance was similar to a waltz, but he would finish each box with a stride, sort of dance walking, and headed straight for him. He described the man as being very tall and lanky and wearing a business suit with a wide cartoonish-like smile that never once changed in shape, along with wide-opened, wild-looking eyes. He had his head tilted back while looking at the sky. Before he could get a better look of the man, he decided to cross the street before the smiling man could get any closer. For just a moment, he took his eyes off the man to cross the empty street. As he reached the other side, he glanced back and then stopped dead in his tracks. The smiling man had stopped dancing and now was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to the man. He was now facing him but still looking up at the sky, the wild smile still wide on his face. The man, now completely unnerved by this, decides to keep walking but keep his eyes on the smiling man who didn't move an inch. After about a half a block of distance between him and the smiling man, he looked away for a brief moment to see the sidewalk ahead of him was entirely empty. Then in an instant, he looked back to see that now the smiling man was completely gone and out of sight. He was relieved to know the smiling man was gone until he noticed him again. The smiling man had now crossed the street but was now in a crouched down position, facing him in the dark distant shadows of the night. He had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so he was pretty unnerved that just in those 10 seconds he could move so quickly. The man was utterly shocked and stood there just staring at him while the smiling man began to start moving towards him once again. This time in a tiptoed fashion as if he was a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, but in a very quick pace. The man, still terrified, didn't move an inch and just stood there while the smiling man was quickly approaching him. Terrified and angry, the man tried his best to shout at the smiling man, but all he could make out was a slight whimper, but the smiling man didn't react or respond. He still just stood there staring wide-eyed with his same cartoonish smile. Then after what felt like a lot of time had passed, the smiling man turned around and started dancing away in the opposite direction. The man, now relieved to finally be done with this chilling encounter, watched as the man danced away, not wanting to turn his back until he was far enough away to be completely out of sight. But then the man started to notice something. The smiling man wasn't moving anymore, nor was he dancing, and now his shape became larger and increasingly closer. That's when the man realized the smiling man had now turned around and was running towards him in a full-speed motion, coming right for him. The man, now horrified and in full panic mode, runs away until he's off the side road and now onto a better lit road with more traffic. The man had looked behind him the whole time to see if the smiling man had ever returned, but he was finally gone and out of sight for good. The man of this story never went on another late night walk again, and it was never discovered who the smiling man actually was. The author also claimed in his story that the man never looked drunk and he never looked high. He just looked utterly insane and without a soul. So that's a pretty creepy story, right? If you enjoyed this story, you should also consider checking out the short film based on this story called 2 AM, as well as a horror animation by Llama Arts and narrated by Mr. Nightmare. So who exactly was the smiling man and what were his motives? According to the author of the story, he was just a regular man dancing in the late night with a wide creepy smile on his face, with a dark otherworldly vibe to him. I did a bit more digging and found that this story spread like wildfire, and there's actually tons of similar stories out there by others who have also claimed to have seen the smiling man. There's even a fully dedicated subreddit to the smiling man with a surprising amount of stories. Some of them claiming that they've even had dreams of the smiling man, describing him exactly as he is in the author's original story. A tall and lanky man in a dark suit with a creepy and sinister smile. No one will ever really know who the smiling man really was, but I think we can all agree that regardless, this is undoubtedly one of the creepiest stories found on Let's Not Meet and on the internet in general. Now, before we close the door on this story and open the next, I'd like to add a final note from the author of this story. The author has stated, and I quote, "To anyone doubting the truth in this story, I assure you it happened. I'm not afraid of ghosts, demons, or monsters. It's people that frighten me." There you have it. That leads us to number 2. The next story on our list is arguably just as creepy as the first, but in an entirely different way. This story was posted on Let's Not Meet by Reddit user Sweet Mercy. This story is about a woman recounting the details of an experience she had in the late 1970s as a little girl when she encountered a strange man claiming to be a pediatrician who went by the name Dr. Ramsey, who spent a great deal of time stalking her. The story begins with her explaining that right before her 10th birthday, she took a little walk to a corner store, when she was then approached by a man she'd never met before who began talking to her. The man introduced himself as Dr. Ramsey and said he was a pediatrician, then begins to try and make conversation with her. She walked along silently, choosing not to reply to him and hoping he would leave her alone, but he didn't. He begins to ask her if her parents are in need of a pediatrician for her, telling her that she's almost a big girl now and she'll need a special kind of doctor very soon. He then begins telling the little girl they can bring her to him until then and begins asking what her name is while creepily complimenting her. He offers for her to join him in his office for lollipops, asking if she likes candy. Nearing her house, she runs away from Dr. Ramsey, running into her house. This was only the beginning of a very scary ordeal for the little girl and the encounters of Dr. Ramsey. After the first encounter with Dr. Ramsey, he began randomly showing up at different times of the day. He would drive by her house and wave and smile at the little girl nearly every day. The little girl told her mother about this, but her mother brushed it off as maybe he was just driving through the neighborhood on his way home from work. Shortly after that, they started to receive phone calls from Dr. Ramsey. Her father, who was concerned, called her into the living room asking about the day the man had followed her home and if she had spoken to him. She replied that she didn't, and her father went on to explain that somehow the man knew her name, but neither of them knew how he got that information, considering the little girl didn't say a word to him, nor had they ever encountered the man before. It turns out that was not all the man knew about the girl and her family. He also knew the little girl's sister's name as well. Soon after these events, neither the little girl or her sister were allowed to answer the phone. The man called several times a day. Then one day he called again, telling the little girl's parents that he was going to harm both of their daughters. Things got a bit complicated after that. The father called the police, but since this was all before any stalking laws, there wasn't much that could be done about the man. The police did, however, tell the father that if the man tried anything, to call them back. The father then contacted an old friend of his from high school who later became a police officer. For the next month or so, he escorted the little girls to and from school every day. Life as their family knew it came to a screeching halt for the little girls. They weren't allowed to walk to school alone, and they couldn't play outside. They were pretty much prisoners in their own homes, in fear of the next possible encounter of Dr. Ramsey. When access to the little girl was denied, things began to escalate for the worse. Then one day, both little girls, her brothers, and her mom were in the kitchen. One of the brothers noticed a glimpse of someone hiding in the garage. It was Dr. Ramsey. He came bolting out of the garage, to which then her older brothers chased after him through a park, but unfortunately lost him in the trees. Once again, the little girl's parents notified the police, but as previously mentioned, nothing could be done. The only real information that they had on the man was a description of his face and a name, which was almost certainly fake. A couple of weeks passed by, and the family awoke one morning to something unbelievably disturbing. The family's pet dog had been found hanging from the side porch. The family was devastated and once again called the police, but since there was no real evidence that Dr. Ramsey committed the crime, nothing could be done. In the meantime, Dr. Ramsey would continue to call, and his calls became much more informative. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't, telling the girl's brother on the phone that he knew who was really there when the brother told him their father was home. He would then talk about the house itself, stating he knew exactly how to get in through the window and unlock the hatch with a knife from the outside, even when it was locked. He also said he knew how to get in through the French doors that connected to the living room to the side porch, and how the lock can be unlocked if you jiggle it just right. Later that night, the father decided to put some carpenter nails into the bottom of the French doors until they could get a new lock. Then one night, the girl's parents had to go to a company event for her father's work, which meant she was going to be home alone with her sister and one of her little brothers. It was a late night, and as the girl was watching TV, suddenly the top of the French door swung inward, and in the few milliseconds before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, she could see the silhouette of none other than Dr. Ramsey. The little girl and her sister immediately ran upstairs, then realized about halfway up they had left their little brother asleep downstairs on the living room floor. As quietly as they could, the little girl snuck back downstairs, grabbed their brother, and slowly creeped back away into their bedroom, not turning on any lights so they could see outside into the darkness. They watched through the window for a while, but they didn't see the man. They then decided to creep down the hallway and enter one of their brother's bedrooms to try and get a better look. When they looked down, they could see the silhouette of the man at the back door. He then began to knock loudly at the back door. Asking what the man wanted, he claimed he was there for a pizza delivery and asked the girls to open the door. The girls, not believing him, told him they were calling the police, to which surprisingly was enough to make Dr. Ramsey leave. A little while later, the girls' older brothers arrived home, and the girls explained what had happened with the man. The brothers walked outside, walking around the yard watching for him, but nothing ever happened. At this point, the girls and her brothers had pretty much given up on calling the police, as it never helped. They each went back inside the house, each carrying a knife from the kitchen, just in case they needed to protect themselves. One of the brothers started to act strange. It was the little one. He started pacing around the house, looking around as if he felt someone was watching him. He couldn't get over the feeling of eyes piercing right through him. He decided to go look through the door to see if there was anything or anyone there. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the windows of the door, so he couldn't see if anyone was there. He stepped a bit closer until he was right up to the door, then cupped his hands on the other side of his head so he could see. There, on the other side of the window pane, was Dr. Ramsey smiling back at him. He turned to yell for his older brothers, but when he looked back again, Dr. Ramsey was gone. They went out yet again to look for him, but didn't see him. The next night had come, and the brother was feeling tired and restless. When asked what was wrong, he said he felt like any moment now they were going to hear a loud knocking at the door. He was absolutely terrified from the events of the previous night. But he was right. Immediately after he said that, it happened. A loud and obnoxious knocking came from the window right behind him. In the chaos, the two eldest brothers came running after him, but again, they were too late. Dr. Ramsey was already gone. A couple of weeks had passed, and while the little girl was at school at recess, she noticed a blue Ford Galaxy slowly driving by. It was Dr. Ramsey, and he was doing his usual creepy smile and wave. He called the little girl by name, but she ran to her teacher, telling her about the man. The school had been told all about Dr. Ramsey. The little girl's mother was called about this, and that very same day, the school's office called the little girl's mother to confirm that her father was picking her up from school that day, as they had received a call saying he was on his way, but he wasn't. Not long after these events, the little girl woke one night and went down to the kitchen for a drink of water. Sitting alone in the dark at a table was her father. On the table was a gun. He was tired. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized. He was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to his children while he was gone. These events and many more took place over a period of around 18 months. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Dr. Ramsey had completely vanished from the family's lives. The phone calls, the drive-by with the creepy waves, everything. It all stopped. The little girl, for a long time during and after the terrifying events of Dr. Ramsey, claimed she would have recurring nightmares in which she would wake up to find him standing over her as she slept. She also found out years later that when he was calling, Dr. Ramsey would tell her parents that he was going to rape and kill her, and later her sister as well, and that there was not a single thing they could do about it. According to the author, it was never discovered what happened to Dr. Ramsey when he disappeared. Whether he was in a car wreck, locked in prison, or in a coma. She also said that she often wondered if the wait ended for her father when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen that night with his gun on the table. Now let's talk about this. This was probably one of the most chilling stories I've ever encountered on Let's Not Meet, and it's a classic. From what I've gathered here, by the end of this story, it seems that the author possibly believes that Dr. Ramsey disappeared due to her father killing him with his gun. She also said that on many occasions she's thought about asking her father about it, but she's too scared to hear the answers. While all of that's just speculation, it's still a pretty insane thing to think about. Now, I want to talk about the Dr. Ramsey himself, the insane psychotic individual who terrorized these little girls and her family. This man comes out of nowhere claiming to be a doctor, going by the name Dr. Ramsey, and stalking you and your little sister and harassing your family, telling your parents that he's going to rape and kill you and your little sister. This is like a real-life horror film played out in reality. The thought of this happening to any family is terrifying. But who really was Dr. Ramsey? Was he actually some kind of real psychotic doctor? Or was he just some lunatic who called himself Dr. Ramsey for kicks to terrorize children? This is another one that's just an unsolved mystery that we'll probably never get the answers to. But once again, it's definitely one of the creepiest stories found on Let's Not Meet. The author of this story is also writing her story of Dr. Ramsey in book form, so if you're interested in that, I'll be sure to link all of that information below in the description. Now, that brings us to number 3 and the final story on our list. Now, the final story here is an interesting one and probably holds the most mystery. This is the kind of story you'd tell your friends and family around a campfire when you go camping. A lot of us love music, classical music. It's really soothing, right? There's nothing like the beautiful sound of a violin playing. But what if you heard that sound while in the middle of the night? What if you awoke to that sound? Pretty creepy, right? Well, that's what one Reddit user just so happened to experience, and a lot more. A popular story known as Violin Hill was posted on Let's Not Meet by an anonymous user. The story details an experience of a woman who, after moving into a brand new neighborhood in Australia, starts hearing and encountering a mysterious figure playing a violin on a hill in her neighborhood. Thus the title Violin Hill. The story begins with the author stating that at one point in her life she had moved into a brand new home in a building estate in Australia. She was one of the first to move into the area, and she was quite excited to be one of the first to get a new home there. During her first few weeks on the property, nothing strange or out of ordinary really happened. She would often take walks with her dog, roaming around the surrounding estate area. All of the surrounding roads had been halfway completed and all of the other properties were marked out, but no other houses were built, excluding one that was directly opposite of hers. The house looked finished, but there was no driveway laid out yet, and from what she could tell, no one had lived there, at least not yet. To the left of her house, around a few hundred meters away, was a field with a huge hill in it. She later found out that the whole area was council property, and not only was no one allowed to build up there, but the entire hill was a no-go zone. No one was allowed to be there, and for whatever reason, the council just didn't want people on it. The entire area was surrounded by a huge chain-link fence. The only other noticeable feature in the area was a little abandoned farmhouse with a shed a few kilometers down the road. She didn't know anything about it and often went walking there with her dog, as it gave them something mild to explore amongst the vast nothingness they were living around. The entire area was dilapidated and completely inhabitable, but it was still interesting nonetheless. Here's where the story starts to truly live by its title and take off. About a month or two after moving in, she awoke one morning to the sound of a violin playing. She described the sound as being very faint and quite haunting, and actually claimed to have enjoyed it. Upon hearing the odd sound of the violin, she had assumed that some new neighbors had finally moved in. Excited that she finally had some new people to talk to, she peeked out of the curtain and saw that the house opposite to hers was still as vacant as it ever was. She got dressed to check things out, but by the time she managed to look outside, the sounds coming from the violin had stopped. She claimed that this happened roughly every second day for the next week. The violin would wake her up and then just disappear after about 45 seconds had passed. She'd ignore it, but eventually her curiosity got the better of her, and the following next morning, when she heard the violin playing again, she jumped out of bed, threw on her clothes, and shot out the front door. She scoured the early morning surroundings, and that's when she noticed it. Looking up at the hill mentioned earlier, there was a figure on top of it playing a violin. It was barely sunrise, but the person appeared to be very tall from the distance, and as they were playing, was doing what could only be described as a waltzy type walk, spinning slowly around in a circle as they played. She took her eyes off the figure and walked over to pick up the morning paper, and in the 10 seconds that it took her to do that, the violin abruptly stopped playing. When she looked up, she began to notice that the figure was no longer playing nor dancing, but was now just standing and most likely looking in her direction. It was so dark that she couldn't make anything out. They both just stood there for a half a minute, not moving. Eventually, the spooks got the better of her, and understandably, she went inside. After that morning, more creepy things started happening. During her walk, she began to notice footprints on the surrounding properties that weren't made by her, and that she'd never seen before. She assumed they were just from people walking up from the other housing areas down the road. She claims that she never awoke to the violin, but swore up and down she could hear someone walking down the street next to her bedroom window in the early mornings. However, she never saw anything. She then started getting calls at work that would immediately hang up on her. Being a bit shaken up from the encounter with the violin playing, she stopped walking to the abandoned farmhouse. Then one night as she was heading to bed, she turned off the TV in her living room, and again could hear the faint sound of a violin playing. However, this time it sounded more muffled and rehearsed. Scared and creeped out, she froze. Chills ran through her body. Taking into account that it was about midnight and not the usual time she'd hear it playing, she decided to go to the front window and peek out. There was a light in the house opposite of hers. She could see a candle flicker in the empty window, and the music sounded like it was coming from an old record player. She watched for 10 whole minutes, but she never saw any movement inside the house. She then moved away from the window, sufficiently freaked out, and after another 5 minutes, she heard the music once again abruptly stop. Still curious, she peeked out again to notice the light was now out. After this happened, she began to become unsettled in the house and would often invite friends over to hang out until late hours of the night. But of course, nothing would ever happen when she wasn't alone. She claimed that she never bothered to tell any of her friends, as without evidence, she figured they wouldn't believe her. What happened next, though, is where this story begins to truly shift from creepy to downright terrifying. She describes in her living room that she has a desk that sits right next to a small window which looks out to the fence surrounding her property. The steel fence is exactly an arm's length away from the house and about 6 feet tall. With it being such a large height, she figured that unlike most of the other windows, she'd never need to cover that one because no one could ever see in. Well, that's what she thought. She would often play games in the dark while having her headphones on, but one night she began to completely regret that decision. One night while she was gaming, she got up and walked into the kitchen. It was dead silent, excluding the faint sound coming out of her headphones. As she closed the fridge and turned around to face the desk, she saw directly out the window 2 extremely faint lights. She hadn't caught on and immediately started walking back to the desk, fixated on the small glowing balls, and it wasn't until she almost had her nose pressed against the glass that she realized what she had seen of the 2 lights weren't lights at all. They were eyes. Big white glowing eyeballs. A set of eyes just sitting above the fence line staring wide open at her, not blinking one single time. Terrified and entirely consumed with fear, her body locked up, and all she could do was simply stare back as her mind was still trying to comprehend that there was an actual person looking at her in the scariest way anyone could ever possibly imagine. Not knowing how, her body automatically collapsed and fell to the floor, scurrying to hide against the wall from the window. She could feel and hear her heart beating through the carpet like a drum as she tried to lay as flat as possible. And as her mind was still trying to comprehend the severity of the situation, the violin started playing. The violin and the haunting tune it always emitted started up, except this time it was directly outside her window and much louder than it had ever been before. The lights were still off in her home and she wanted to get up to turn off the screen to her PC so she couldn't be seen, but her whole body just didn't want to cooperate. Not only was the sound of the violin extraordinarily loud, but she claimed that it sounded like it was being played with hateful frustration. Notes were being repeatedly missed and the strings screeching. The pace of it was getting faster and faster, and by this time her dog out in the backyard had picked up on the situation. Registering an unfamiliar sound, gave one solitary deep bark. The violin instantly stopped and her house was finally dead silent. She was still frozen to the carpet. It wasn't until her dog gave a second menacing bark that she heard the figure outside the window start to walk away in the direction of her yard. Once the first footstep hit the ground, her whole body kicked into overdrive. She leapt from the ground and slid across the laminated floor to the back door where her dog was standing, staring into the backyard. She ducked to keep low and quietly unlocked and slid open the door. She did this to let her dog know that he was allowed back inside, but when she opened the door, he didn't move an inch. The dog was completely fixated on the pitch-black backyard. All of her fears and the events of that night told her not to go outside, but she put her hand under his collar and attempted to back him toward the house, but he didn't budge. Yanking at his scruff, he emitted a bark like she'd never heard before. A deep, bellowing sound that elevated her ears like never before. They both just stood there waiting for some form of reply, but not remembering how long they stood there frozen, she eventually heard footsteps from around the side of the house begin to walk away. But not a simple walk, almost like whoever was doing it was slowly dancing in a circle. The footsteps keeping to a beat as they slowly drifted away from the house and into the distance. Once she couldn't hear anything, her and her loyal dog wandered back inside, locking the door behind her, and spent the night hiding under her blankets, not getting a single second of sleep. And that was the last time she ever saw or heard the violin player. The following morning, when the sun finally rose, she called the police. They scoured the lot next to hers and found footprints in the dirt. However, there were so many that it was impossible to tell whose were whose. The only description she could give to the officer was his height, which had to have been over at least 6 foot to be standing at the fence. The police told the woman that they've never received a report of anyone playing a violin in the area or anyone being on the fenced-off hill either. The officers offered to patrol the area for the next few nights and nothing else happened. After the events of this story, over the next few years, more people finally started moving in and the story started to circulate through her whole neighborhood. Apparently, a fellow resident in the neighborhood nicknamed the council lot Violin Hill, so the name just stuck. The author claims that she spent a massive period of time scouring the internet to find that haunting cold tune the man played on his violin, but unfortunately she could never find it. To this day, the author is still living in that same house and she still tells people the story of Violin Hill. She also closes her story out with one final line: "I now only game with the blinds closed." So this is one hell of a story. I mean, it's not exactly downright insane and horrifying, but it's truly creepy and chilling. I can't imagine moving into a brand new home, being the only resident in the area, and waking up to some creepy violin playing. And even more so, seeing a face in my window followed by more creepy playing of a violin. Once again, this is definitely one of the more creepy stories found on Let's Not Meet. So there's not too much to say on this one, but I did find it interesting that a lot of Reddit users compared the figure playing the violin to the story previously mentioned, the Smiling Man. The author did say that the figure in this story did some kind of weird waltz when walking off, so that's kind of interesting considering that was the Smiling Man's whole dance routine, if you will. Do I think though that the Smiling Man and the Violin Man are the same? Probably not. The world is filled with all types of different horrors out there. There's bound to be more than one scary figure lurking in the dark. So be careful out there and watch your surroundings, because you never know who's looking over your shoulder or watching you from a distance. I hope you all enjoyed this video. It's a different take on narrating and I wanted to try something different. I've got a lot of different stuff coming soon and I hope you like it. Have a wonderful and spooktastic Halloween, everyone. I hope you and your little ones enjoy some candy. But remember to always stay hungry. I'd like to thank all of my $5 and up patrons before I close out this video. Ulisa, Babe Lincoln, Beth A, KT, Carrie B, Celeste S, Courtney T, Ellie S, Goodnight Goosebumps, Howard R, Jazzy G, Jennifer M, Catherine M, Carrie F, Matthew B, Steffi, Tammy S, and Terry H, as well as my $3 patrons featured on screen. Thank you guys so much for still supporting me on Patreon. It means more to me than you know. Good night, everyone.